At 2:07 a.m., Park Ji-hoon
Jenny.
opened his office door and found his wife asleep in his chair. For a moment he thought he was looking at a stranger. The desk lamp was the only light in the room, angled low, throwing gold across the edge of the desk and leaving Jenny half in shadow, her head tipped to one side, her braids spilling over her shoulder, one arm folded beneath her cheek, and the other resting flat against a stack of papers, as if she'd fallen asleep guarding them. He said her name once, quietly, testing
Jenny.
whether this was real. She didn't wake. He crossed the room, and it was only as he reached the desk that he saw what was under her arm. Not the loose consulting notes she sometimes brought home, not a laptop, but a thin brown accordion folder he recognized immediately, and with a jolt that went through his whole body like cold water. His father's handwriting on the tab, faded but unmistakable. Personal, CMP Chulmin Park, his father's private financial records, untouched since the funeral. Ji-hoon's hand hovered over the folder without quite touching it, and in that hesitation, Jenny woke. She surfaced the way people do from very deep sleep, slow at first, and then all at once, her eyes opening, finding him, and going somewhere past him to the folder beneath her own arm. He watched it happen, not panic, not the wide-eyed guilt of someone caught in an obvious lie, but something quieter and more unsettling, her hand going still on the papers, her breathing pausing for exactly one beat too long, her attention narrowing entirely onto what he was looking at, rather than onto him. Ji-hoon. Her voice was rough with sleep, but her eyes were already sharpening, already calculating. What time is it? Late enough that you shouldn't be here. He nodded at the folder. What are you doing with my father's records? She sat up slowly, drawing the folder toward herself instead of away, which struck him as strange even in the moment, not hiding it, protecting it. I can explain. Then explain. Not tonight. It's not. She stopped herself, visibly, the way a person stops when they've caught themselves about to say something true. It's complicated, and it's late, and I don't want to explain it badly. You're in my office, at 2 a.m, with my dead father's private financial records. He heard his own voice go flat, the register he used in board meetings when a number didn't add up, and someone was hoping he wouldn't notice. There is no version of an explanation that isn't owed to me right now. Jenny didn't answer immediately. Instead, her eyes moved, just briefly, just for a fraction of a second, toward the bottom drawer of his desk, the one with the small brass lock, the one that had, as far as Ji-hoon knew, been locked since the day the police returned his father's personal effects 11 months ago. He followed her gaze and felt something drop through the floor of his stomach. The drawer was open, not forced, open, cleanly, the small key still seated in the lock, turned. How did you get that key? He said. It came out quieter than he meant it to. Quieter was worse. Ji-hoon. That key has been in a dish on my dresser since the funeral. I have never given it to you. I have never told you where it is. He heard himself say the next part before he'd decided to say it. Which means either you went looking for it, or someone told you where to find it. Jenny stood, gathering the folder against her chest with both arms now, and for the first time since he'd walked in, he saw something that looked less like calculation and more like fear. Not fear of him, he realized, watching her closely, but fear of the conversation itself, of where it would go if she let it. I need you to trust me for a few more days, she said. I know that's not fair to ask. I know how this looks. You don't know how this looks, because you haven't told me what it is. He stepped between her and the door, not aggressively, but deliberately, the way he might block a hallway in a negotiation he didn't intend to lose. Jenny, what were you doing in here? She looked at him for a long moment, long enough that he registered, distantly, how tired she looked. Not sleepy tired, but worn down in a way he hadn't noticed in the daylight hours, when they usually saw each other in passing, between his meetings and her calls, two busy lives politely orbiting the same apartment. There's something in your father's records, she said finally, that I think you need to see, but I'm not finished understanding it myself, and if I hand it to you half-formed, it could hurt people who don't deserve to be hurt, including you. That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give you tonight. Try harder. He hated how much his voice had risen, hated that he could hear his father in it, the particular controlled anger Chulman Park had used on subordinates, and, occasionally, on his son, that Ji-hoon had sworn he would never use on anyone he loved. He brought it back down with effort. "Jenny, please." Something in the please seemed to cost her more than the demand had. She looked down at the folder in her arms, then back up at him, and for a moment he thought she might actually tell him. Then her phone buzzed, once, sharply, in her coat pocket, and whatever had been about to happen closed like a door. She glanced at the screen. He couldn't see it from where he stood, and her whole posture changed, straightening, going careful again. "I have to go," she said. "It's 2 a.m. "I know what time it is." She was already moving past him, folder still held against her chest, and he caught her wrist without entirely deciding to. Not hard, but enough to stop her. "Jenny, if something is wrong, if someone is threatening you, if you're in trouble, if this has anything to do with the company, you tell me. Tonight, whatever it is, we deal with it together. That's what I promised you." For a moment she softened, her free hand coming up to rest briefly against his, and he thought, there she is, thought he was about to get the truth. "I promised you something too," she said quietly, "that I'd never lie to you." "I'm not lying to you right now, Ji-hoon. I'm just not finished yet. Please let me finish." "Finish what?" She didn't answer. She slipped her wrist free, gently, and was gone before he could decide whether to follow her, the office door easing shut behind her with a soft click that seemed, in the ringing silence afterward, absurdly loud. If you're already asking yourself what Jenny was really doing in that office, good. Stay with it. Drop a comment with your theory before the truth comes out, hit subscribe so you don't miss where this goes, and let's keep going. Ji-hoon stood alone in his office at 2:19 a.m., staring at the open drawer, at the small key still seated in the lock, at the space on the desk where the folder had been. He opened the drawer the rest of the way. Most of what remained inside looked untouched. Old photographs, a stack of letters bound with a rubber band gone brittle with age, a single cufflink missing its pair. But near the back, where the wood met the drawer's felt lining, he found a slim white envelope that hadn't been sealed, its flap tucked rather than glued, and inside it, a single folded page. It was a bank transfer record, a large one, dated 11 days before his father's death, sent from a Hansung subsidiary account to a numbered account Ji-hoon didn't recognize, authorized by a signature he did. Kwon Tae-sung, his father's oldest friend. Hansung's vice chairman, the man who had stood beside Ji-hoon at the funeral with a hand on his shoulder and said, "Your father would be proud of the man you've become," and had said some version of that same sentence to Ji-hoon perhaps 100 times since. Ji-hoon sat down slowly in the chair his wife had just been sleeping in, the paper trembling faintly in his hand, and understood, with the particular vertigo of a man realizing the floor he's standing on is not the floor he thought it was, that whatever Jenny had been doing in his office tonight, she had gotten there first. He didn't sleep. He sat with the transfer record until the sky outside his windows went from black to the flat gray of a soul-morning threatening rain, turning it over, reading Kwon Tae-sung's signature, until the letters stopped looking like letters at all. At some point he put the envelope in his jacket pocket instead of back in the drawer, and locked the drawer again, and pocketed the key, and told himself this was simply prudence and not yet suspicion, though he no longer entirely believed the distinction. He didn't call Jenny. He told himself it was because it was 4 a.m, and she'd earned the courtesy of a few hours' sleep, wherever she'd gone. The truer reason, which he examined and did not like, was that he wasn't certain what he'd say to her, and he had built his entire professional life around never speaking before he knew exactly what he intended to say. He went home at 6. She was there, asleep in their bed, coat hung neatly on its hook, second phone charging on the nightstand where it usually charged, and the ordinariness of it, the sheer, deliberate normalcy, unsettled him more than an empty apartment would have. He didn't wake her. He showered, changed, and was at his desk by 7:30, staring at his email without reading any of it, when his assistant knocked to tell him Kwon Tae-sung wanted to see him before the 9 o'clock board meeting. Did he say why? Ji-hoon asked, and heard the strange, careful note in his own voice. Something about the Lagos infrastructure numbers, I think. He didn't say much. Ji-hoon nodded and sat very still after his assistant left, turning that sentence over the way he'd turned over the transfer record all night. The Lagos infrastructure numbers. His father's last major deal. The deal that had, in its final weeks, made his father short-tempered and sleepless in a way Ji-hoon had assumed at the time was simple overwork, and had never once, in 11 months of grief, reconsidered. Kwon Tae-sung's office occupied the corner 1 floor below Ji-hoon's, decorated the way a man decorates a room he intends to occupy until he dies in it, dense with photographs, half of them featuring Ji-hoon's father, several featuring Ji-hoon himself at various ages, shaking Kwon's hand at graduations and openings and, once, at his own wedding. "You look terrible," Kwon said, not unkindly, gesturing him into a chair. "Marriage keeping you up?" It was the second time in 2 days someone had said almost exactly that to him, and Ji-hoon filed the coincidence away without knowing yet what to do with it. "Something like that," he said. "How is Jenny? I haven't seen her since the Lunar New Year dinner." Kwon poured tea without asking, the way he'd done since Ji-hoon was a teenager visiting the office with his father. "Formidable woman. Your father liked her enormously, you know. Said she was the only person besides your mother who ever told him something he didn't want to hear and made him grateful for it afterward." Ji-hoon accepted the tea and said nothing, watching Kwon's hands, watching his face, hunting for something he wasn't sure he'd recognize even if he found it. "I wanted to talk to you about Lagos," Kwon said, settling behind his desk. "Specifically the final disbursement schedule your father approved before he passed. There's an audit coming. Routine, nothing alarming, but I want our story straight before outside eyes get involved. Some of the subsidiary transfers in that period were unorthodox. Your father moved quickly near the end. I want to make sure whatever we present externally matches what actually happened, so nobody misreads urgency as impropriety." It was, Ji-hoon thought, either the most reasonable thing a vice chairman could say to a chairman's son before an audit, or the most elegant warning he had ever received in his life, and he had spent 11 years in board meetings without developing the instinct to tell those two things apart, in Kwon Tae-sung's voice specifically, because he had never once had reason to try. "Unorthodox how?" Ji-hoon said. "Timing, mostly. A few transfers routed through subsidiary accounts rather than the main disbursement ledger. Not unusual for that period. We were restructuring the Lagos entity's tax position, but it can look strange out of context." Kwon's eyes stayed level, warm, entirely unreadable. "If you come across any of those documents, your father kept some personal files. I know. Things he never digitized. I'd appreciate you bringing them to me before they go anywhere else. Legal, the board, outside counsel. Let's make sure the family's interests and the company's interests are protected together, the way your father would have wanted." Ji-hoon thought of the envelope in his jacket pocket, 6 inches from Kwon Tae-sung's eyes, and felt his own pulse in his throat. "Of course," he said. He found Jenny at noon, in the small office space she kept above a print shop in Itaewon, the one she'd never fully explained the purpose of beyond calling it "where I do my own work," and which he had, in 3 years of marriage, visited perhaps 4 times, always at her invitation, never once uninvited. Today he didn't call ahead. She was at her desk with a man Ji-hoon didn't recognize, mid-50s, gray at the temples, the kind of quiet, deliberate stillness that Ji-hoon associated with people who had spent careers being careful. And both of them looked up when he opened the door, and both of them, for one unguarded second, looked exactly the way Jenny had looked in his office at 2:07 that morning. Caught. Ji-hoon. Jenny stood too quickly, the same tell as the night before. "This is David. David Wills. We worked together in Lagos, years ago." "I know who David Wills is," Ji-hoon said, which was not entirely true. He knew the name from a handful of bylines Jenny had shown him once, admiringly, years ago, in the early months when she still narrated her old career to him unprompted. "I don't know why he's in Seoul in your office, the same week I find you asleep in mine with my father's private files." David had the grace not to pretend surprise. He glanced at Jenny, a question in it, and Jenny gave the smallest shake of her head, and Ji-hoon watched the exchange with the specific, Sick clarity of a man realizing there was an entire conversational shorthand between these two people that he had never been part of and, until this moment, had never known existed. "I should go," David said, gathering a folder from the desk. Ji-hoon's eyes went to it instinctively, though it wasn't the same folder, wasn't his father's, and left with a nod to Ji-hoon that managed to be both apologetic and entirely uninformative. Jenny closed the door behind him and turned to face her husband, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "Kwon Tae-sung asked me this morning to bring him any of my father's personal financial files, if I found them," Ji-hoon said, "before I let anyone else see them, before I let legal see them, before I let the board see them." Jenny's face didn't move, but something behind it did. He could see her recalculating, fast, the way she must have looked in 100 newsrooms deciding in real time how much of a story to run. "What did you tell him?" she asked. "I told him, of course. I lied to him, Jenny, this morning, standing in his office, because some part of me already didn't trust him, and I didn't know why until I stood there and watched him say your name, like he was fond of you, and felt something crawl up the back of my neck." He took the envelope from his jacket and set it on her desk between them. "I found this in the drawer, after you left." She looked at it without touching it. "You read it." "I read it. A transfer, authorized by Kwon, 11 days before my father died, to an account with no name attached that I can find." He heard his own voice shaking now, and didn't try to stop it. "Jenny, I need you to tell me right now today whether you think Kwon Tae-sung had something to do with my father's death. Because if that's what this is, if that's what I've been sitting on all night without knowing it, I need to know before I sit across a boardroom table from that man again." Jenny was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost the careful composure of the office the night before. It had something rawer in it, something that sounded, for the first time since he'd known her, almost frightened. "I don't know if he killed your father," she said. "I don't have proof of that, and I won't say something I can't stand behind. You know that about me. It's the one thing about me that hasn't changed since the day I met you. But I know your father found something in those last 2 weeks that scared him enough to start hiding records from his own company's systems. I know he called an old contact of mine 3 days before he died, asking about a reporter who used to investigate shell companies in West Africa. I know that contact was David, and David told me, because he thought I should know, and I have spent 4 months trying to find out what your father found without telling you, because—" She stopped. "Because what?" Ji-hoon said. "Because I didn't know if you'd believe me over him." Her voice cracked, finally, on the last word. "Kwon Tae-sung has been in your life since before I existed, Ji-hoon. He held you as a baby. He spoke at your father's funeral, and you cried on his shoulder. And I am the woman who married into this family from outside, who still can't always read a room the way your mother wants me to, who half your board still calls Ji-hoon's African wife behind closed doors like it's a category instead of a person. If I came to you 4 months ago and said I think your father's oldest friend might have had something to do with his death, and I was wrong, even partially wrong, what do you think that would have done to us? What do you think it would have done to me, in this family, for the rest of my life?" The room went very quiet. "So instead you went looking for proof first," Ji-hoon said slowly. "In the middle of the night, alone, in a locked drawer, with a key you got from somewhere you still haven't told me." Jenny closed her eyes briefly. "The key," she said, "is the part I haven't told you because it's the part that will hurt you the most. Tell me anyway." She met his eyes, and he saw her decide something, saw the exact moment the 4 months of careful, protective silence finally gave way. "Your mother gave it to me," she said. 3 weeks ago, she's known about the transfer since before your father died, Ji-hoon. She's known for almost a year." The words landed in the room like something physical. "She told you," Ji-hoon said very quietly, "and not me. She was trying to protect you." "And I think," Jenny said, her voice breaking properly now, "I think she's terrified of what happens to this family. To you, if the truth comes out. I think that's why she came to me instead of you. Because she thought I was the one person who might be able to find out the whole truth without either destroying you or getting destroyed myself." Ji-hoon sat down heavily in the chair David had vacated, staring at the envelope on the desk, at his wife standing over it with tears finally, silently, sliding down her face, and understood that the mystery he'd walked into his own office to solve at 2:07 that morning had just split open into something far larger than either of them, and that somewhere 2 floors above where he now sat, Kwon Tae-sung was almost certainly, at this very moment, wondering exactly how much Park Ji-hoon already knew. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text, from an unknown number, 4 words long, arriving at the worst possible second like the closing of a trap. "We need to talk. Alone." Yoon-ji, his mother's assistant, the one person in the building who never texted him directly, unless something had already gone wrong. Jenny saw his face change before she saw the phone screen, and something in her posture shifted. No longer the woman who had just confessed a 4-month secret, but the reporter again, the one who read a room by watching what a single sentence did to the person receiving it. "Who is it?" "Yoon-ji, my mother's assistant." He turned the screen toward her. "We need to talk. Alone. She's never texted me directly, ever. My mother relays everything through the house line, through Sumin, through anyone but Yoon-ji, because Yoon-ji has been with the family since I was in primary school, and my mother trusts her more than she trusts most of her own children." "That's not a woman who texts casually," Jenny said. "No." He was already standing, already reaching for his jacket. Something's happened. His mother received them in the sitting room of the Pyeongchang-dong house, the one with the tall windows overlooking a garden his father had designed, and never once, in Ji-hoon's memory, actually sat in. She looked smaller than she had at Chuseok, smaller than she'd looked at the funeral even, and Eun-ji stood by the door rather than sitting, the posture of someone standing guard. "You told her," his mother said to Jenny, without preamble, without greeting either of them, her eyes moving to Ji-hoon with something that looked almost like relief, and almost like grief arriving at the same time. "I asked you to be careful. I didn't have a choice, Iomeoni." He found the transfer record himself. In the drawer. His mother closed her eyes briefly. "Then it's already begun," she said, more to herself than to either of them, "and there's no more use in me protecting anyone from anything." "Protecting me from what?" Ji-hoon said, and heard the strain in his own voice. "Uma, what did you know?" His mother gestured them both to sit, and when Eun-ji moved to leave the room, she said, "Stay," in a tone that made clear this was no longer a private family matter, that it hadn't been for some time. "Your father," she began, "was not a man who scared easily. You know this. 31 years running that company, and I never once saw him lose sleep over a bad quarter, a lawsuit, a hostile press cycle. In the last 3 weeks of his life, he didn't sleep more than 4 hours a night, and when I asked him why, he told me it was nothing, the way he told me everything was nothing, for 35 years of marriage, and I let him, because that was our arrangement." Her hands were folded in her lap, very still, very controlled, and Ji-hoon recognized the stillness. He had inherited it from her, not from his father. 2 days before he died, he came to me and said that if anything happened to him, I was to trust no one at the company completely, not the lawyers, not the board, not even Tae-sung, who he called his brother in every meaningful sense for 30 years. He didn't explain. He said he was still gathering proof, and that proof, unfinished, was more dangerous than no proof at all, because it could be twisted into a story that protected the wrong person. "And you did nothing with that for 11 months, Ji-hoon said. It wasn't an accusation, quite. It came out closer to disbelief. "I did something," his mother said, sharp now, the first real edge in her voice. "I watched. I could not go to the police with a warning, and no evidence about the vice chairman of Hansung Group, the man who has stood beside this family since before you were born. Do you understand what that accusation would do, with nothing behind it? It would destroy the company, destroy your father's legacy, destroy you, and if I was wrong, it would destroy an innocent man who has done nothing but grieve his best friend for 11 months, alongside the rest of us. I needed someone who could look without being seen looking. Someone Tae-sung would never suspect of investigating him, because she had no obvious motive and no history with the company beyond her marriage." Her eyes went to Jenny, and something in them, for the first time since they'd walked in, softened. "I found the one person in this family who used to do exactly this kind of work for a living, and who I trusted enough to ask." Jenny sat very straight, hands folded tightly in her lap, and Ji-hoon understood, watching her, that this, being trusted, being seen for the specific, particular skills she'd spent a career building, rather than for who she'd married, had moved her more than she wanted to show. "Why not tell me any of this?" Ji-hoon asked. And this time the hurt was unmistakable. His mother looked at him for a long moment. "Because you loved him without complication," she said. "Because your grief for your father was clean, Ji-hoon. And I did not want to be the one who took that from you, before I was certain it needed to be taken. I have watched you carry his company on your back for 11 months like a man carrying a coffin uphill, telling yourself every day that you're honoring him. I could not hand you a reason to doubt whether the man you were honoring had been betrayed by his oldest friend, not without proof, not without something solid enough to survive the accusation." "And now?" Ji-hoon said. "Is there proof?" His mother looked at Jenny. Jenny exhaled slowly. "There's more than the transfer," she said. "That's what I was trying to piece together last night, before you found me. I fell asleep because I'd been at it for 6 hours, and I still didn't have the full shape of it. But I have most of it now. I think." She looked between them. "I think I need to show you both something, and I need you to let me finish before either of you reacts." She opened the tablet she'd carried in her bag, the same one Ji-hoon now realized she must have carried into his office the night before, and turned it so both of them could see. 11 days before your father died," she said, "a subsidiary account transferred 900 million won to a numbered account in Singapore. The authorization bears Kwon Tae-sung's signature. On its own, that could be almost anything. A legitimate business transfer routed through an offshore structure, which Hansung has done before, legally, many times. What makes it different is this." She swiped to a second document. A scanned ledger page, handwritten, the writing unmistakably Ji-hoon's father's. "Your father kept a private log, not company records, personal notes, dates, names, small details, the kind of thing a man keeps when he's building a case he isn't ready to bring to anyone yet. He tracked 4 transfers over 6 weeks, all authorized by Kwon, all routed the same way, and next to the 4th one, dated 4 days before he died, he wrote a single line." She looked up at Ji-hoon before continuing, as if to brace him. "Confront T tomorrow. If I'm wrong, I owe him everything. If I'm right, I don't know what I do." The room was silent. "He was going to confront him," Ji-hoon said slowly. "The day he—" "I don't know if he did," Jenny said gently. "I don't have proof he ever had that conversation. I don't have proof of what happened after. What I have is a pattern of transfers your father was quietly documenting, and a note showing he intended to raise it with Kwon directly, and then, 4 days later, he was dead of what the coroner called sudden cardiac arrest, in this house, alone, at 59, with no prior heart condition anyone in this family knew about." She paused. "That's not proof of murder, Ji-hoon. I want to be completely honest with you, because I think you need that more than you need me to hand you a villain. I don't have proof of murder. What I have is proof that your father believed his closest friend and business partner was moving significant, undocumented money in the weeks before his death, and that he was afraid enough of what he'd find to warn your mother to trust no one, and careful enough not to accuse anyone until he was certain." "Then what were the transfers for?" Ji-hoon said. If he wasn't. "I don't know yet," Jenny admitted. "That's the piece I haven't found. David's been helping me trace the Singapore account through people we both used to work with in financial reporting, but offshore structures like that are built specifically to be untraceable by people like us. It could be embezzlement. It could be something Kwon was hiding from your father entirely, unrelated to whatever your father suspected. It could be something your father was involved in himself, in some way neither of us understands yet, and Kwon was simply the signatory." She held his gaze. "I promised myself I would never hand you half a story and call it the truth. That's why I didn't come to you 4 months ago. I needed to know what I was actually giving you before I gave it to you, because once you know, you can't unknow it, and if it's wrong, it will have cost you something you can never get back. Your trust in the last honest memory of your father." Ji-hoon sat with that for a long moment, and something in his chest, some tight, defended thing he had been carrying since the moment he saw the folder beneath her arm, loosened slightly. Not resolved, not comforted, but loosened, the way a held breath finally lets go, even when the danger hasn't passed. "You did this to protect me," he said. "Both of you." "We did this because we love you," his mother said. "And because your father asked one of us to, in his own way, before he died. And the other one of us simply couldn't stop herself from finishing what he started. That is, I think, the truest thing I can tell you about your wife, Ji-hoon. She does not know how to leave a wound unexamined. It is the same reason your father trusted her before either of us did." Jenny's eyes went bright at that, and she looked away, out the tall windows toward the garden Chulmin Park had designed and never sat in, and Ji-hoon watched her collect herself the way she always did, quietly, quickly, without asking anyone to wait for her. "There's one more thing," Jenny said when she'd steadied, "and it's the reason I fell asleep in your office instead of coming home. I found a name in your father's private log I didn't recognize. Not Kwan's, a different one, referenced only once, in the entry from the day before he died. I was trying to cross-reference it against the Singapore account structure when I lost the fight against being awake." She pulled up a final image, a photograph of a single handwritten line, half obscured by a coffee ring, the ink slightly smeared. "Call H. Song, confirm before I speak to T. H. Song," Ji-hoon repeated. "I don't know anyone by that name." "Neither do I," Jenny said. "But I think we need to find out who does, before either of us says a single word to Kwon Tae-sung." They found H. Song 2 days later, and not through cleverness, through a name in Hansung's decade-old vendor database that Soo-min, once told the barest outline of what they were looking for, and sworn to absolute secrecy, dug up in an afternoon. Song Ha-eun, a forensic accountant who had done contract work for Hansung's internal audit division 9 years earlier, and whose contract, according to the records, had been abruptly terminated the same month it began, with a settlement payment and a non-disclosure agreement attached. She was 61 now, retired, living in Ilsan, and it took Jenny exactly one visit. No press badge, no pretense, just a quiet knock and the truth about who she was and why she'd come, to get her to speak. "Your father called me 11 months ago," Song Ha-en told them, sitting across a small kitchen table with tea neither Ji-hoon nor Jenny touched. "I hadn't heard from him in 9 years, not since the audit." "What audit?" Ji-hoon said. 9 years ago, your father asked me to review a set of subsidiary accounts he suspected were being used to move money outside the company's normal reporting structure. I found what he was afraid I'd find, a pattern of transfers authorized by senior leadership, routed through shell entities, that didn't correspond to any legitimate business purpose I could identify. I brought it to him. He thanked me, told me he'd handle it internally, and a week later I was let go, paid a substantial settlement, and asked to sign an agreement never to discuss the audit or its findings. She looked at Ji-hoon steadily. "I assumed at the time that your father had decided to protect the company rather than expose it. I was angry about that for a long time. I've had 9 years to be angry about it." "And 11 months ago?" Jenny prompted gently. "He called me. He said he'd been wrong 9 years ago, that he'd believed at the time he was containing a problem, handling it quietly, the way his generation of businessmen handled everything. He said he'd since discovered that the person responsible for the transfers had never stopped, had simply gotten better at hiding them, and that he needed my old findings, if I still had them, because he intended to do what he should have done 9 years earlier." She reached into a drawer beneath the table and withdrew a thick manila envelope, worn soft at the corners from age. "I still had them. I gave him a copy. I kept this one, because some part of me always suspected I might need it again." She slid it across the table. Inside were photocopies of 9-year-old bank statements, transfer authorizations, and a handwritten summary in Song Ha-eun's own careful script, and at the bottom of every single authorization, every one, spanning 9 years, spanning what had clearly been 2 separate periods of activity, separated by a long, careful pause, was the same signature. "Kwon Tae-sung, your father called me back 4 days before he died," Song Ha-eun said quietly. "He told me he'd confronted Kwon directly with everything, the old findings, the new transfers, all of it. He said Kwon had denied nothing. He said Kwon had asked for 1 week to make it right quietly, to return the money, to resign his position with dignity rather than face exposure, and that your father, out of 30 years of friendship, had agreed to give him that week. She looked between them. 4 days later, your father was dead. I don't know what happened in that room, Mr. Park. I only know that whatever proof your father was building disappeared with him, and I was too frightened, and frankly too tired of being punished for telling the truth, to come forward on my own with nothing but an old story no one asked me to tell. Ji-hoon didn't sleep that night either. He sat in the study with the envelope open on the desk in front of him, Song Ha-eun's old findings beside his father's private log beside the Singapore transfer record, 3 separate threads of the same rope, and Jenny sat across from him, not pushing, not filling the silence, simply present, the way she had learned, over 3 years of marriage to a man who processed grief by going quiet, to simply stay in the room. I keep thinking about the last conversation I had with him, Ji-hoon said finally. 2 days before, we talked about nothing, quarterly numbers, my mother's birthday. He asked if I was happy, which he never asked, and I told him yes, and he said good, and that was it. That was the last real conversation I had with my father, and the whole time, he was carrying this. Deciding whether to give his oldest friend a week to disappear quietly, or destroy everything he'd built to expose him. He looked up at her. Do you think Kwon killed him? I don't know, Jenny said, and it was, again, the honest answer rather than the comforting one. I think it's possible your father's heart simply failed under the weight of what he was carrying. The stress of it, the sleeplessness, confronting a man he loved with a betrayal that big. Grief does terrible things to a body, and so does fear, and your father was carrying both. I also think it's possible Kwon panicked, once he realized your father might not actually give him the week he'd promised, might go to the board, or the police, the moment he had one more piece of proof. I don't think we'll ever have certainty about the second question. I don't think a coroner's report from 11 months ago is going to be reopened and rewritten based on what we have. Then what was any of this for? Ji-hoon's voice cracked. Finally, the composure he'd been holding since 2:07 that morning 2 nights ago finally giving way. If we can't prove what happened to him, we can prove what he was going to do about it, Jenny said. We can prove 9 years of theft, dressed up as loyalty, from a company your father built and you're now responsible for. We can make sure Kwon Tae-sung never gets the quiet week your father almost gave him. And we can make sure that if your father's heart did fail because of what this man did to him, it wasn't for nothing. She reached across the desk and took his hand, and he let her. You don't have to solve the mystery of how he died to finish what he started, Ji-hoon. You just have to finish it. The board meeting was called for the following Tuesday, ostensibly to review the upcoming audit. Ji-hoon requested it be moved up, cited preliminary findings requiring urgent discussion, and watched Kwon Tae-sung's face across the table. For the exact moment the warmth in it went carefully, deliberately still. He laid it out plainly. Song Ha-eun's 9-year-old findings, his father's private log, the Singapore transfer record, the pattern spanning nearly a decade, and watched 11 board members' faces cycle through disbelief, then calculation, then, one by one, the particular stillness of people recognizing they were about to have to choose a side. Kwon didn't deny it. That, in the end, was what struck Ji-hoon most. Not a confession, not an outburst, just a long silence. And then, quietly, almost gently, your father was going to give me a week. My father is dead, Ji-hoon said, and his voice didn't shake. I'm not giving you anything. It took 4 months for the legal proceedings to resolve. Restitution, resignation, a criminal referral for embezzlement that Ji-hoon, after long conversation with his mother, chose not to expand into an unprovable accusation of something worse. Some truths, they agreed, could be pursued to their absolute edge and still leave a gap no court could close, and Ji-hoon had decided, somewhere in those 4 months, that he would rather live with an honest gap than force a false certainty into it. On a warm evening in early autumn, almost a year to the week since he'd found his wife asleep in his chair with his father's secrets under her arm, Ji-hoon found her again. Not asleep this time, but sitting cross-legged on the floor of his office after hours, papers spread around her, a habit she'd never entirely broken. You're doing it again, he said, from the doorway, and she looked up, and smiled, unguarded in a way she rarely allowed herself to be at this hour, in this building. "Old habits," she said. "David wants me to look at something for the NGO, a logging concession in Ghana that doesn't add up. I told him I'd take one look and then stop." "You never stop at one look?" "No," she admitted. "I don't." He crossed the room and sat down beside her on the floor, in his suit, in the office his father had built, and he had nearly lost trust in, and had, slowly, over 4 difficult months, learned to walk into again without flinching. "I used to think," he said, "that the night I found you in here was the worst night of our marriage, waking up and not recognizing the person across from me. And now I think it might have been the night I actually started to know you." He picked up one of the papers scattered across the carpet, scanned it without really reading it, set it back down. "You could have told me you suspected something the moment my mother came to you. You didn't, because you were protecting me from a wound you weren't sure was even real yet. That's not the same as lying to me, Jenny. I understand that now. It took me a while." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The office quiet around them, the city glittering faintly through the tall windows the way it always did at this hour, indifferent and beautiful and entirely unaware of what had nearly been lost and, in the end, hadn't been. "I fell asleep in your chair that night," she said finally, "because some part of me knew I couldn't finish this alone, and I think I was waiting for you to find me, even if I wasn't ready to admit it." "Well," Ji-hoon said, and for the first time in almost a year, there was something light in his voice, something that sounded, faintly, like the man who had grinned at a reporter calling him a liar in a conference room in Abuja a lifetime ago. "I did find you. You did. Try not to make a habit of it." She laughed, a real laugh, low and surprised out of her, and outside the window the city kept its quiet, and inside the office that had once held a dead man's secrets and a living woman's fear, there was, for the first time in a very long time, simply the two of them, and nothing left to hide. If this story kept you watching until the very last line, that's exactly what it's here to do. So let us know in the comments which moment got you the most. Hit that like button and subscribe for the next Afro-Korean drama. See you in the next one.